So, I guess we start with the obvious. This project, it's dead. That's it.
It's dead.
It will go down as one of the worst executed plans of all time. A car crash, really, for those 12 owners.
You're so excited about a sports story.
The drama, the soap opera of just what's going to happen
about
next
the money,
is
not about the sport.
You've never seen anything like it. I mean, this is
being seen as a power grab motivated by greed.
Fans burned jerseys. Prince William tweeted in protest.
The little guys, they're fighting back and they're saying no.
Why did it take just 48 hours for the biggest, most read story to implode and crumble?
Hi Aisling, welcome at Private Kitchen. Very nice to have you again here. And this time we want to talk about another project of yours, Supergreed. The Fight for Football is the subtitle I saw. Well, I'm curious about your last story about the boxing, now this time about football. Can you tell us about what's the story, the fight for football, and how did things start? How did you go along making music, making a score for this film?
Yeah, so this was a follow-up sports film that happened after Lioness for Sky. Really fantastic film as well, directed by Karl Heinmarch, who originally comes from a journalism background, so brought also a very interesting kind of investigative approach to it. And I was drawn to it also because of the main themes of the film being quite dark. So it's essentially about the rise and fall of the European Super League that they attempted to establish, and how over the course of 3 days, all of football kind of rallied together to really, rally support and protest against this movement. And so by and large, it was about the corruption within football. It was about the political games that are played within football. It's about leadership. It's about fighting for a sport that is supposed to be accessible to every single person in the world, yet is run by such a small, group of sharks for the most part. And the difference between football as a sport of the heart and football as a financial interest, really. That's what it came down to. And so this is what really interested me, was how universal a language sport can be, how it can bring people together and, inspire hopes and dreams in just about anybody. But then also this really dark underbelly that has always persisted in football, and hooliganism and the political parties kind of monopolizing certain areas of it for their own good. So that's what the film is about. And of course, given the darkness of the themes, it felt like a pretty good fit.
Yeah. How did you start out? How did you develop, again, in the same way with the other boxing film, a concept, or did you had another approach?
It was very different in the sense that with Nicola's story, it was really about her. It was about her story, her struggle. With Supergreed, I really wanted to show how football belonged to everybody, how it was everybody's story, and how it, it crosses borders, languages, everything in a similar way to how music does that. It really creates a language of its own. I was, I guess, trying to find a theme that was a lot more universal and quite epic. I really wanted it to have quite a a big, inspiring sound, but without it being cheesy. So, of course, everybody's used to the big football commercials, the big, football games. And so I was quite wary that I didn't want to go straight to that and that it still needed to be different. And so, I mean, I do find a lot of inspiration, I guess, also in the natural world, and in terms of samples, it felt to me something quite primal. Sport is something quite primal, right? Sure. It really, it's this feeling of your gut of like, you want to win. And, I'm a very competitive person myself. So it definitely inspires all of those emotions in me. I started again with the percussion, with the rhythm, with like what is this thumping heartbeat of football. And so a similarity was that I often look for ways to bring sounds of the real world into the score, because this is something that I think you just feel when it's in the score, and you recognize it from the outside world. And even if you don't know exactly what it is, even if it's a sound that's been so far manipulated, there's something in your soul that connects to it, because it's something that you recognize from sounds you hear around you every day. So in this case, I started by recording my younger brother, who very much came into handy in this point and is an avid football player, hitting a ball against a goal post. And trying to see what kind of sounds I could get from the metal ringing, from the ball hits, from various elements, like of going into the net. And I was like, okay, what are the sounds that players are surrounded by? What are the sounds you're surrounded by when you're in a stadium? The roar of the crowd, the huge kind of echoes that you get through it. And then these stadium feelings are also quite unique in that sense as an experience. So I kind of start normally by creating a wall on my studio, which unfortunately I can't show you now because it has the current project on it, but with loads of different post-its, drawings, graphs, quotes, buzzwords, like things that to me signify what the heart of the project is, So for Supergreed, I had various football players, I had various newspaper cutouts, headlines, I had words like, corruption, dreams, elementary school football field, like all these little things that I'm like, okay, this is part of the story. And then also things like, money laundering and right-wing political parties and hooliganism and all of that. So when I'm composing, I almost have like a mood board in front of me of these different things that I want to translate into sound. And the director had ideas of the direction he wanted to take it into, and given that we were also telling football history, through the 60s, 70s, the creation of the Premier League, what bands were big at the time, also the far right movement that was very prominent in the United Kingdom in the 70s. All of these different elements had an influence on it, and the director was quite adamant that he wanted to have a sort of live band feel to it as well. It became a process of kind of creating this sound world where it felt both epic, but leaning more into big live drums and guitars and, wide pads and soundscapes rather than going to the epic strings.
I was noticing that you told you about all the post-its, etc., the quotes on the wall. Do you use it with every project? Because it's an interesting approach. It's kind of method that you used for every project?
Well, so yeah, I do now. I started it with Lioness, admittedly, because I was really trying to see like, okay, how am I charting the energy, of the film? Because I think as with every film, especially when you're doing more intense subjects that are, they're driven by obsessive themes, tension, corruption, like thriller-esque narratives. You can't be here all the time, or your audience is just gonna have a heart attack and walk out of the film after 20 minutes. You know, it can't be that intense all the time. So I was trying to kind of take a step back and look at the arc of the score and what are the peak moments that really do need to be super intense. Which moments are strong enough in the story that they don't actually need that much help from the score, and that can be more stripped back. And sometimes I think, you know, silence is more powerful than music, and about knowing when to just give it space to breathe. And especially when you've got a score that has a lot of beats and percussion in it, you know, it does tire on the ear quite fast. So I started just drawing it out, and I've always been this person that, you know, I don't remember something unless I've written it down.
Okay.
Pretty much. So I just wanted to draw it out. So I started by kind of creating, a graph, as it were, where I would have the different scenes along the film and the progression of the film, and then the intensity of the music and what I wanted to portray. And I would just start by, okay, this is a 6, that can be a 3, that's an 8, you know, and then I started drawing in the graph, and I mean, it's a bit obsessive, I admit that.
It's very useful, I think, because one of the things I find most difficult as a composer, particularly for films of length, for like 1.5 hours, is to have to look at the total score of 1.5 hours. You know exactly what you mean. The graph that's there. That's one of the questions also. Are the deadlines quite severe? Because most of the times, in my case, you're so involved with specific scenes, and you lack the time to step back and to look at the whole and have an overview at the whole.
And it's not even just you as the composer. I think the challenge is often that the team, the director and the editor, are also zoned in on one section of the film. So the director can be like, well, I've watched this scene, you know, 1,000,000 times, and I'm just not feeling like it enough. I want more. But that's also because you've watched the scene 1,000,000 times, so you're never experiencing as if you watch it for the first time. And second of all, once you step back and watch the film as a whole, if you scored every scene like that, it's never going to work. It's always a completely different experience. So I find it really useful to always kind of have a master overview of the picture, so that I know that once I'm viewing stuff in context, and I always end up stripping back to about 1/3 of what I initially write anyway, you know, because it's just too much and you don't want to go too heavy-handed. And I think over the years, I've started stripping it back even more and more, because it can be so powerful without being very dense necessarily. Exactly. So that is, for me, that has now become part of the process, because I think it's really important to make sure that I'm looking at the project as a whole and not just as individual scenes. Supergreed in particular was very difficult in that sense, because every scene, you know, it was going over different football clubs as well, like the 11 top football clubs. So you couldn't justify giving Manchester United less of an arc than Chelsea or Arsenal or Tottenham Hotspur. They all needed to have their own moment. But you know, due to the nature of football and the visuals that you're seeing, there's a lot of adrenaline all the time. The whole film runs on adrenaline.
Actually, I've been in a football stadium a couple of times throughout my life, and for the very first time, it was when I witnessed this, a very weird experience, because you know, you're used to the television registration where all the mics around the field, so you hear the kicking quite close on television, and when you're in the audience in the stadium, then you're much more involved with the audience, and you see some puppets walking over there. You don't hear anything from the soccer. You don't hear them kicking against the ball. So it's really weird. Two worlds. You use both worlds, so the audience more the roar, the big presence of all those people, and the very intimate, close soccer sounds of the footballers themselves.
Yeah, and I always work quite closely with sound design anyway, you know, to try and incorporate into that into the score to make sure that it becomes a part of it, you know, in itself. And I think that's also super important because you don't want to feel like you're layering sound design on top of sound design on top of score, and you know, it just becomes too much. So I guess in a sense with sport, you're lucky that there is always quite a lot of sound, and it's either the really close tactile sounds or it's the enormousness of it all, the enormity of it all. Funnily enough, one of the Dutch projects I did do once was with another composer who's also nominated now, Hielke Praagman, who I know from back in the day, and we co-composed for this football spot in the Netherlands for ING, long time ago now. But that was also, you know, obviously showing the Dutch football team kicking, scoring, all of these things. And so it was like a combination of really working music into sound design. And so that was excellent practice in a sense. For this. So I don't know why, but footballs always seem to find a way.
You mentioned already you were collaborating with the editor in Lioness. Did she also work with sound designers, collaborated in Supergreed, for example, because the sound can be quite demanding?
Yeah, and this one, it was a bit less so. It was quite demanding, yeah, 100%. I mean, so I would always send stems anyway, and then during the final dub, you know, try and see if we can bring down certain elements to sit around the sound design more. But honestly, it just really, really depends on the team and who we're working with. Like, I was very lucky that with one of the other films I did, the editor was also very musically savvy. So he was already thinking about like, okay, where can I bring in this stem, and maybe we don't use that, and maybe this can just serve as sound design. So the score was used as sound design almost in parts of the film. I think stuff like that can be amazing, but you need time, and you don't always have time.
Exactly. It's all, most of the time that's the problem.
Yeah.
That everybody's struggling with the deadlines, and then
exactly.
There's no time left to start a collaboration. Are you always present at the dub, if possible?
I try to be. I definitely try to be, and I think it's very helpful just to be able to see everything in its final form, because you forget that whatever you're working to, the film is already at a different stage most of the time, and then it gets sent to you and you update it, but you know, you're always kind of a little bit behind. And so to see everything in real time and to really finish a film together is really helpful, even if nothing is changed, just to make sure you're happy with the final project. Also, just to clear up any confusion. You know, I've had many a times where there is a last minute change that is wanted. So if you're just able to do it there and then, and you know, deliver it straight away, it's definitely a good thing. So I try to be, but sometimes the schedule doesn't allow it.
Okay, thanks a lot for this insight in scoring a football film. And you mentioned Buccaneers already, so maybe we can discuss this in a later. Thanks.